Congressman Price, thank you very much. It's
Thank
an
you.
honor
Glad to
have
be with
you
you.
on Cafe DC. What did you like to be called, a professor or a congressman? Which title is better?
Well, I'm about over 20 years away from the classroom, so I guess
Congressman.
it still shows. But for better or worse, I'm a congressman.
You did have an illustrious career as a professor, as an academic.
I took a PhD in political science at Yale and taught there for a few years, and then taught at Duke University. Helped start the Terry Sanford Public Policy School. Very satisfying assignment, and I gradually became more and more involved in North Carolina politics. Took a leave of absence during the race that older folks remember very, very well, Jim Hunt versus Jesse Helms for the Senate in 1984. I took a leave and ran the state Democratic Party that year. It was a very bad year for Democrats, and so it was the next election, 1986, when I first ran for Congress. Took back one of the congressional seats we had lost.
In 1987, and then again you lost in 1994.
Lost in 94.
Those were the historic times, the Gingrich times, I guess, right?
That's right. That was the so-called Gingrich revolution.
Era, yeah.
And it did reach North Carolina, for sure. We turned over 4 seats, including 2 incumbents being defeated, one of whom was me. We did turn that around again within a 2-year period, but it was a period that I had not expected to return to the classroom, but I did, and Duke University welcomed me back. So I had
a great school, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I was back in teaching in the mid-90s as well.
But Congressman, this transition was quite remarkable because when you're in academia, it's much more relaxed, laid back, research oriented, and you're just, you don't have to run for your office every 2 years, raise funds, and then focus on the district. I mean, but in Congress, it's all the time an uphill fight, so to speak. So how was this transition from academia to politics, and that too at this congressional level?
Well, I wouldn't overestimate the calmness of academic life. It has its own pressures. But I did have a good professional situation at Duke with the public policy school and political science, teaching things I was very interested in. I was always, though, drawn to politics in the real world, as they say. And so I studied a lot of rather practical aspects of politics. As a student, I spent a series of summers when I was in graduate school working in the office of an Alaska senator. And what I saw there led me to my PhD dissertation topic. I interviewed a third of the members of the Senate in that period in the 60s and wrote about legislative initiatives in the U.S. Senate and how things really were happening in terms of policy ideas coming to fruition. And so I would say I did a very practical kind of political science. I focused on staff members and the role they had in instigating policy changes. So I learned a lot about Congress. I had some ideas when I came here about how the place worked and about how I wanted my own office to work. And I'd say that was about as good a preparation as I could have had. That's not to say it wasn't different. The day-to-day environment is very different, and I still sometimes yearn for the time when I could read a book all the way through. So what you say is right. There, in academics, you do concentrate and dig in more.
Exactly.
On the other hand, I came in here with my eyes wide open. I pretty well knew how the place worked.
So your profession, your previous profession or career prepared you well for this job?
I think it did. I had been a staff member myself in the Senate, and I combined that, of course, with my academic research. So I knew a good bit about Congress.
Congressman Price, there are lots of lawyers in Congress, and of course they have a totally different worldview because of their background. So do you sometimes have a clash of ideas with them just because of their background, or they don't understand which you seem to have a full grasp on?
Well, I don't think most of the fault lines here in the Congress would go along those lines. There are differences in perspective, and I actually looked at this a good deal as an academic before I ever got here. I was interested in ethics and public policy, and the way that our values and our religious and philosophical tradition get fed into the policy process. And it struck me that the adversarial system, which the legal system is predicated on, is not always an adequate system for getting at the truth. You know, you have two competing sides maximizing their arguments, assuming that the clash of ideas, that each trying to undermine the other's arguments, that clash of ideas somehow produces the truth. I don't think that's necessarily always true, and I think it has some deficiencies even in the legal world. But it certainly has some deficiencies in the policy world. I mean, there's a place for administrative discretion and administrative wisdom in taking a statute and taking the intent of the legislature and translating it into public policy, implementing it. And even the clashes here, just both political parties maximizing their arguments, just going at it. Is that the best way to come out with a reasonable solution or to discover the truth? I'm not sure that's true. I think you need other kinds of processes other than an adversarial process, more deliberative processes. Ideally, we get that in the committees here. We have a chance to operate in a more discursive way. But it's an interesting question, you know. Certainly our political system, our legal system, relies very heavily on adversarial processes to come to a conclusion. When the two sides are very deeply different, when they're separated, that becomes more difficult, certainly becomes more contentious. And so it's a good question whether the adversarial system that lawyers specialize in is an adequate model for the political process.
Very well. Well, we'll move on to one of your favorite projects in Congress. You've been involved with the House Democracy Project partnership, and as a result, you also travel a lot overseas. You go to different democracies. Can you please tell us about this project, what it's about, and why it was needed?
The idea of the House of Representatives as an institution, reaching out through members and staff, reaching out to parliaments that are developing, that are trying to increase their capacity. That idea goes back to the early 90s. There was this unique moment in Eastern and Central Europe when the Iron Curtain fell, the Soviet Union dissolved, and there were many, many countries that aspired to a Western-style democracy, parliamentary democracy. They had showcase parliaments that didn't really do much. But there was this challenge to make those into real functioning institutions. So through the so-called Frost-Solomon Commission, this institution responded. I was a very junior member at that point. I was involved in some of those efforts, and it really stuck with me. And if you look now at the functioning of, let's say, the Polish or Czech parliaments, you'll see there's some lingering effects of those years of building up. So it occurred to me 10 years ago that you know, this work isn't done. There is something like this developmental process going on in lots of countries around the world, ranging from some very poor, struggling countries to major countries that are now realizing democracy. Kenya, Indonesia. There's a range of countries that would like to partner with us, and it would be mutually profitable to do so. So we started the House Democracy Partnership. I was chairman of it during the years of Democratic leadership. I was the co-chairman when the Republicans were in charge. This work has slowed down a bit now. We're attempting to bring it back, and I think we will bring it back. But for 8 years, certainly, we have worked extensively in 16 countries, ranging, as I said, from very small places like Liberia, East Timor, Haiti, to major regional powers, Kenya, Indonesia. Afghanistan, certainly, Pakistan. A lot of still unfinished business, I think, in former communist countries, Mongolia, Kyrgyzstan, Macedonia, Kosovo, Georgia. These have been good partnerships. They've been mutually helpful. We certainly don't assume that we're exporting a fixed product. Every country has to work out their own precise ways of operating, their own ways of ensuring democratic representation. But we do have a long history and a commitment to this that many people find valuable, and we want to work on it. It's been a very rewarding engagement.
Coming up after the break.
And we certainly know we have lots of problems and challenges here, and Iran is a tough adversary, and there are many divisions within Iran.
When you say mutually beneficial, yes, of course, you give them ideas on constitution and legislation and other like democracy-related issues. What America gets out of them, out of these emerging democracies?
Well, I learned a long time ago as a political scientist that the surest way to get a fix on your own system is to compare it to others. If you're simply looking at American politics and American practice in isolation, you have no point of comparison. Often a very limited point of critique, and evaluation. So I think that's one value. I used to say back when we were involved in Central and Eastern Europe, I never had a political science lesson like this in my life. As you looked at these parliaments all finding their own ways, and you tried to be helpful in advising them. So that's part of it. You get an additional perspective on your own system. We certainly know we have lots of problems and challenges here. That's very evident to anybody who watches C-SPAN for 5 minutes. And so we have some work to do here, and we get a perspective on that. I also think that in terms of this country's diplomacy, this is a very important component of it. It's a big mistake to forget the parliaments, to forget the legislative branch of government when we're doing our diplomacy, and that includes members of Congress. So often our members will go in, they'll meet with the president, with the prime minister, and they're on their way. That is not the way for, I think, legislative bodies to relate to other countries. We should be in touch with our counterparts, our peers. Also, you think about it, people in the room when you're dealing with parliamentarians, they're the leaders of tomorrow. A lot of the young leaders, people who we'll be dealing with later in these countries, are right there in the parliaments. So there are all kinds of reasons, I think, that our country benefits. Also, to the extent a country has a representative, responsive government that can bring conflicts inside the parliament, avoid chaos in the streets, involve those kinds of conflicts, that, of course, that's the kind of world in which we believe our country will thrive.
Congressman, you mentioned Eastern Europe, Africa, Afghanistan, where your partnership is working closely with these democracies and these people. President Obama gave landmark speech yesterday at West Point about U.S. foreign policy, and there's been a lot of criticism as well, even in the liberal media, about his approach to some of these flashpoints overseas. What do you think? What's your take on his strategy going forward?
I think that speech should be read as a broad strategic statement about the approach he takes to foreign policy, the approach our country should take to foreign policy. And some of the criticisms say, well, it's too much on the one hand, on the other hand kind of reasoning. Well, that's exactly the world we live in. And there are ways in which our country can be over-engaged, over-involved, intervene too readily, especially too much in military terms. And on the other hand, there are instances we can remember where we should have intervened and where our passivity was catastrophic, like some of the cases in Africa of genocide, which our country passed up the chance to have more of an effect. So I think the president is trying to strike that balance conceptually, but he wasn't arguing that this is an easy way to solve a specific dilemma. He was simply saying these are the kinds of considerations one undertakes, and we may have erred on the side of one or the other in past cases. I think particularly of Syria. I think we all think of Syria a lot, wondering, were we appropriately cautious there, understanding the mix of elements involved on the revolutionary side, or could we somehow have intervened with more effect earlier, before the jihadists became so prominent? That question is going to occupy us for a long time, and of course he's still trying to get that balance right. So it doesn't solve individual cases. It does, I think, raise the right questions, and it provides a framework going forward.
You have been involved on Iran nuclear issue,
Yes.
the negotiations, and do you think the administration policy is adequate and they have addressed all the issues, and this is the right approach to follow as when it
Yes,
comes to Iran?
basically, I think it's the right approach to follow. That does not mean that success is guaranteed. This is a very tough situation, and Iran is a tough adversary, and there are many divisions within Iran. It's not clear to what extent President Rouhani is going to be calling the shots there in the end. So success is not guaranteed, but I do think the administration has approached this in a very constructive way. In fact, I think it's one of the most impressive examples of the approach that President Obama outlined, one of the most impressive examples of how that can work. We try diplomacy first, and we don't make a lot of negative assumptions in advance about what diplomacy might achieve. We observe elections and other changes on the other side. We try to take advantage of those. We test as to what they might make possible. And it does look like this interim agreement is holding. And we get mixed reports week to week out of the actual negotiations, the official level negotiations, the staff work that's going on. I'm hopeful about this, and one reason I'm hopeful is that I think for both sides the alternatives are unthinkable. Iran continuing to develop a nuclear program with the kind of reactions that surely will bring forward, or on the other hand, just going to war and another Middle East war for this country. So I think we're going to try hard to make this work, and I would agree with these analysts who seem to be saying that on the whole array of, and this, you wouldn't have predicted this a year ago, after all, but of all these this array of foreign policy dilemmas, this seems to be the one that the administration has handled most skillfully.
Congressman, you're a ranking member on the subcommittee of Homeland Security. And last year, you voted against the amendment to the Patriot Act, basically, about the surveillance and data collection program, NSA's data collection program. And recently, Mr. Snowden gave this interview to a major U.S. network, NBC, his first to a major U.S. network. And he basically defended himself, why he did it and what he wants to do now. He said he wants to come back home, but he doesn't want to go through a jail cell before he settles down. What's your take on this issue? It has caused a major uproar outside and inside this country. What's the most appropriate approach to this issue?
Well, the Secretary of State, as you know, immediately reacted to the Snowden interview, and I'm sure he's correct that the Snowden revelations have done great damage to this country. They've damaged this country's interests. They've jeopardized some of our operatives and operations. And you can't play by these rules, which is to say that people take it upon themselves to disregard their professional responsibilities, their legal constraints, and simply operate according to their own view of things. If Mr. Snowden conceives this as civil disobedience, and sometimes he talks that way, then, of course, part of civil disobedience is facing the legal consequences, which he, of course, has refused to do. The fact is, though, that our surveillance system had gone beyond what I think most Americans, including most members of Congress, realized or were comfortable with. And so a correction is underway, and it needs to be underway. Now, the vote you referred to on the Homeland Security bill was a very quick and indiscriminate response to this. For that reason, I thought it was not the right approach. But I very much think that we need to rein in surveillance. We need to have greater transparency, greater legal protections for whatever kind of activity we're undertaking. Certainly, we need to get hold of this business of surveilling friendly governments, friendly leaders in other parts of the world. So it's appropriate that the President and the Congress undertake a thorough review of this. And of course, this comes from the Snowden revelations, so it is an outcome that I think we need to make constructive as we go forward. We need to make some major changes, but that's of course separate from the question of Mr. Snowden's legal and professional situation.
Coming up after the break.
Americans worry about a good deal about the kind of image that we have abroad, and these are brave, resilient countries, and we admire them.
Would you support a request from him for amnesty if he seeks one?
Excuse me, for
Amnesty? Would you support?
I would think that's inconsistent with the premise of civil disobedience. If this is civil disobedience, then part of that is facing legal consequences.
So basically, just what you're saying is whatever is the administration's position on it, just come back and face the legal
Well,
process.
Secretary Kerry did not go into the legal details, or for that matter, what down the road this country might do with respect to this. So I really don't know precisely what their thinking is, but the fact that Mr. Snowden has chosen to take refuge in Russia, questions of what Russia might get out of this, and questions about what the implications are going forward for the conduct of people whose professional and legal responsibilities are to protect this country. You know, those are profound implications. Decisions about this, I think, won't be made with respect simply to Snowden alone. So that is something that the administration is of course going to have to work out. In the meantime, I think our responsibility is to look at the broader picture, look at the use of surveillance tools, the kind of legal protections that Americans should enjoy, and fix this system. Do the very best we can to come up with an alternative system that has much more transparency, much more in the way of judicial and other protections.
Congressman, you travel a lot overseas, and of course you interact with the common man as well, grassroots people, members of parliament, member of the executive branch. In your opinion, what's the biggest misperception about the United States of America, which should be addressed here?
That's of course, something people, Americans worry about a good deal, about the kind of image that we have abroad and the extent to which we need to really work on that. I understand that the main image many people have of America is through Hollywood, is through our commercial products, or alternatively through our military efforts and exploits. And I think all of those are partial and inadequate views of what this country is about. What we're striving for with our House Democracy Partnership, and this is just one small contribution, but we're working on our counterparts in these developing countries, and these are countries that are aspiring to democracy. These are not the most
established
difficult cases.
democracies. Yes.
Yeah, well, establishing democracies, I'd say. Countries like Indonesia that often have a undemocratic past, but who have really established a very impressive course now toward full democracy. Kenya, many of the former communist countries. These are brave, resilient countries, and we admire them. And they seem to admire us. I'm sure with some reservations in many cases, but you know, it's a matter of finding out what kind of positive and constructive lessons we can learn from each other, including learning from our mistakes in the past. So the image we're attempting to project, and it's very heartfelt, it's very genuine, is that we admire these countries, these aspiring democracies. We understand that we have a lot mutually to learn from one another. So, and that as Americans, as American politicians, we understand what they're going through. We share a lot with them as parliamentarians, the kind of challenges of daily life, but also the challenges of running an effective institution.
Congressman, finally, do you think America is on the right track?
Yes, I have great confidence in this country's future, and I think when you look at indications of where we're headed, such as the President's foreign policy speech recently, I think we've charted a sustainable course, one that corrects certain tendencies from the past. We're coming out of a rough modern period, though, with the rather bitter history of the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, wars that divided this country and wars that represented, in the view of many of us, a kind of overextension of a military approach to world affairs. There are other things this country has stood for and worked for that we're very proud of, and that maybe we haven't gotten enough credit for. And we I think need to find a course that sustains our own tradition of democracy, human rights, that works with other countries to realize the kind of world in which those values can thrive, and at the same time realizes that we're not. There's no superpower anymore. There's no hegemony in the sense of one power dominating world
At least
affairs.
one superpower, yes.
That's right. That era is over. It always was somewhat qualified. But so the respect for difference, the respect for autonomy, the understanding of the limits of power, a kind of humility about how things can go wrong, about how even the best intentions are subject to sometimes to outcomes we can't control. That also is part of wisdom going forward. So I'm confident that our country, our leaders generally understand this and have charted a positive course going forward. I'm concerned about the institution I'm serving in right now, the divisions here. I think we have taken the division of powers, the separation of powers at the constitutional level to an extreme. So we have work to do too.
Congressman, pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much, sir.
Oh, glad to see you.